Good afternoon. Welcome to our live chat on waste and circular economy. My name is Gülçin Karadeniz. I'm from the communications team and I'll be moderating this chat. And I'm joined by two colleagues, Almut Reichel and Colgan. Almut, would you like to say a few words about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Gülçin. I work mainly on the circular economy and also on waste here at the EEA, and I look also at the links between the circular economy and waste and what it has to do with climate change.
Okay, thanks Almut. And my name is Shane and I work in the circular economy as well. We work together. And my particular area then, as well as looking at the links between the circular economy and waste, will be to look into monitoring and measuring so we can track our progress in developing this system.
We'll talk a little bit more about that. But maybe we start first. Of course, today's topic is circular economy, waste, and we produce certain things. But before we get to our actual work, what do we mean by circular economy? Why is it important? What is a circular economy?
A circular economy is the opposite of a linear economy.
So what is a
linear economy? Is an economy where you extract the resources from the mines and from the land, and then you use it and then you discard it, throw it away. But a circular economy is a completely different type of economy where we try to use as many of the resources we have and reuse them again and again so that we minimize the need to extract new resources.
A lot of recycling.
Yeah, it includes a lot of recycling, like the waste we produce and feed it back into the economy, but it is much broader. The concept also means that the products we have, that we design them in a way that they can be used again, that they can be upgraded and repaired and so on, and then that we actually put in place an incentives and an environment where this actually also happens, where then the products get reused and repaired and recycled in the end.
We will talk a little bit about it, and I will give some examples as well. Of course, as I mentioned, we do quite a bit of outputs, reports and assessments, and Europe has got big sustainability goals, objectives, quite ambitious as well. So within the sustainability, there was a briefing that we have recently published that talks a little bit about renewable energies. And
yes, it came out from our team, and the briefing is looking at Europe's renewable energy targets. If we're going to achieve these really ambitious targets, we're going to have a large change in our energy system. So we're going to see more wind and solar coming onto stream. We're going to see a lot of batteries deployed to kind of support this. So when the wind doesn't blow, the batteries have stored energy to release. So it's going to be a wholesale transformation of Europe's energy system. And what's going to come out of that then is it's going to be a need for resources, and there's going to be waste generated. So
like what?
So some of these will be very standard waste, so things like concrete and steel from wind turbines, but some of them will be very specific things like the really exotic metals that are used in magnets from motors and things like this, and the coatings on solar panels and the like. So really, I suppose the briefing looked at all of this system and tried to see what's going to happen and where we're going to go with it. So it made a few kind of key messages, I suppose. One was that this stuff is really resource rich. So there's as I said, there's lots of steel and concrete and all this, and all these other really exotic metals. So we shouldn't waste this thing. Then really thinking that the world moves very fast and this technology is moving very fast. So the wind turbine you put up 10 years ago, it's probably going to have to come down soon and be replaced by an even better wind turbine.
Of course, they don't last forever, right?
No.
Yeah.
So that generates a waste, and what are you going to do with that waste? And equally, the technology is moving, the materials are moving. So some of these wastes are like materials we haven't really seen that much before. So how do we deal with them? So we've got this fast-growing system with some complicated challenges, a lot of technical challenges in there.
We'll talk about the challenges as well. But before actually I start bombarding my guests with more questions, for our live viewers, if you do share your questions in the comment sections, the team will share it with us, and I'll actually ask your questions to Almut and Shay. So whenever you have a question, please drop it in the comment section, and we will ask them. So you can actually get answers to your questions. So we started talking a little bit about the types of waste and stuff, and the briefing was a little bit about these emerging waste streams that you mentioned that we don't know exactly. Like, what other types of waste are we talking about? Because I know food waste, I know construction waste, electronic waste. What else is out there, just for our viewers to understand?
Yeah, there is a lot of different types of waste streams, and also that we analyze. There is, for example, the municipal waste. That's more or less the household waste, what we produce at home. Then there is, of course, packaging waste, for example. Then there is the electronic waste, which you already mentioned, and this is one of the fastest growing waste streams we have. Just think of all the new devices we are buying and replacing,
like mobile phones and computers.
Exactly, and also like we see also new developments like clothes that have inbuilt devices, for example, with electronic tracking and things like that, which will be new types of waste streams we will encounter. And then there's, of course, all the industrial waste, like the waste that is produced when big industries produce materials like steel and plastics and so on, chemicals. There is quite a lot of different types of waste. And one type of waste we only encounter once in a while is when there is a big flooding. Then we have huge amounts of waste that need to be dealt with on the spot, for example.
What do you mean? What happens? Like the things just...
Yeah, everything gets damaged, and then you have a lot of damaged stuff that people had in their basements, and they clean it out, and then there's huge amounts to be dealt with. The biggest waste stream actually we have is that from construction and demolition. You can imagine when you tear down a building, it's just massive.
Yeah, what do you do with it? I think where I live there are 8 different bins to sort out my waste, which is always quite tricky as it is, because not everything is just plastic or paper or this and that. And I can imagine with some of these new waste streams that you were mentioning, how do we cope with all that?
Yeah, it's an issue, and we were chatting before we came in here, and waste streams are changing all the time. So you were saying, Almut, about a car. If you think what a car was made of 50 years ago, it was probably mostly steel and maybe bits and pieces of rubber or something like that. Whereas now you think lots and lots of plastics, composite materials, lots of electronics, some little microchips all over the place in the car and little motors. So waste is changing all the time, and I suppose we were asking people to change with it and to think about how can they take action on their waste, segregate it. And I know you're totally right, Gulchen, it's not always too easy to get it right, but if the governments and the waste management companies put the facilities in place, that's half the battle, and the other half is really for us as citizens then to start thinking about, well, how can I get this right when I'm trying to work with my waste?
I think we'll come back to the citizens' point and stuff, but maybe we'll go first to the kind of legislation, because Europe is quite ambitious when it comes to, I think, circularity and waste management and stuff. Maybe you could give a short overview of the main legislation packages.
Yeah, in Europe we have some key directives that deal with waste and with circular economy in a broader sense, and one of the key pieces is the Waste Framework Directive, which explains the key principles on how to deal with waste, but also has an objective to reduce waste, so that we should go for less waste.
Could I just how does that happen? How can you prevent waste?
Yeah, that's actually a very tricky thing because the amounts of waste we generate actually comes out of the way we produce and consume. So then we get back to the circular economy, which I mentioned before. If we manage to move to a circular economy where we keep the products in use for longer, where we recycle the waste, where we make sure that we buy only when we really need it and maybe borrow when we can borrow. That will help us to reduce the amount of waste. And but waste prevention is an area where we currently don't have very strong targets, like that we don't have a quantitative target to reduce waste by X%, but we have this kind of targets for recycling. And there's actually in the waste area quite a number of very specific targets that all the EU member states will have to meet. For example, for municipal waste, the household waste, there is a target that in 2025 all member states will have to make sure that 55% of that waste is recycled, and 10 years later 65% of this has to be recycled. And this is quite a challenge for many countries, and new measures will have to be put in place.
Especially if the waste streams are changing as well.
Yeah.
Besides the Waste Framework Directive, I think there's the European Green Deal and the bigger picture.
Sure.
Maybe Shane, you could talk a little bit about what that entails.
Yes, it's an interesting sort of policy piece, and it's so overarching. You know, it touches on energy, it touches on waste, it touches on transport. It's an encompassing European piece of policy, you know, and drives an awful lot of what we do. And I suppose within it, then there's the Circular Economy Action Plan, which is really, I suppose, where we give take our focus from. And so between that balance, I suppose, of an action plan and then legislation with targets to pursue, I think the idea is that, you know, we'll make this transformation in that way.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk a little bit about what the countries are doing, because I mean the European legislation is one thing, but implementing in the countries is something else. But we started receiving some questions, so for our live viewers, please do share them in the comment section. The first question is from Eleftheria, and it's a little bit like about what you were talking about. Is there any upcoming legislation targeted at addressing recycling waste from renewable energy sources? So this is a quite new waste stream.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know of
Not
any?
Specifically, as far as I know, but for example, solar panels fall under the directive on waste electrical and electronic equipment. So there are already regulations and targets for all the electrical and electronic equipment waste, and solar panels are part of that. There's, I think, nothing specific, for example, for windmill blades yet.
Yeah.
It's more in general, of course, the overall objectives towards moving away from landfilling and incineration towards recycling applies to all waste, but there's no specific targets for all waste streams.
Yeah. Maybe it will come. We'll see.
Yeah.
We did say a little bit about new emerging waste streams and stuff. Maybe Shane, you could talk a little bit about how authorities could prepare for these streams.
Yeah.
Like how to manage these streams.
Sure. I think, you know, some of the stuff become aware is nearly what captures the whole thing, you know. So, you know, authorities need to think about, well, where are things going? So read a report like this, say, well, there's new technology that's going to come to my country and I'm going to have to do something about it. So to be aware of what's going to start coming, to keep an eye on legislation. You know, Almut's talked about quite a bit of legislation here, so what targets are going to come down to my municipality or to my country, so to be aware of that sort of thing, and to be aware of the capacity and the capability within your country or your functional area so that you can deal with these wastes. So I think that's a whole pile of being aware and getting ready for it. The other side then, I suppose, is to engage the people who are going to generate the waste, so the companies and the citizens who are doing this, so that they're on board as well, and you know, they're clear in where we all have to go together, because this isn't just something that a municipality can do, it's something that the whole country will do together.
Mm-hmm. We actually received a question from Vasilis, who is asking, what about electric car batteries?
Yeah.
So this is because, you know, in Denmark as well, across Europe, there are more and more electric cars, and at some point I guess their batteries will be obsolete.
Yeah, so this briefing, that's exactly one of the things. So we looked at three areas, I suppose. It was photovoltaic panels, wind turbines, and then batteries, and we kept mobility batteries, so car batteries, and energy storage batteries together. The data tends to be all bound up together anyway. So there's going to be huge growth in these areas. There is a batteries directive in there already, but it was probably written before people really recognise just how widespread batteries are going to become from, as you say, lots of cars on the street outside, and from these big gigafactories, which I think people probably had barely even conceived of 5 and 10 years ago. So the legislative framework is there, but it's probably going to have to develop and grow in tandem with the sector
There's
itself.
also the waste management capacity needs to grow.
The batteries regulation is currently under review, so there is a process to update it to the new situation we have with much more batteries.
Because the second that you electrify road transport, you will also need to be able to cope with what it means in terms of waste that it will generate in 10 years or 15 years and so on.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah.
We mentioned a little bit, but maybe Almut, you could just give some concrete examples of how national authorities actually tackle waste.
Well, if we look at a specific waste stream, for example, the household waste, the national authorities usually then translate the targets from the EU level into their national legislation. And then usually the municipalities, for example, are responsible for putting systems in place, for example, for separate collection of different types of waste. That is very important, because if you mix all the waste up, then extracting the good things afterwards is very difficult, because it's all contaminated and dirty. But if you separate it at the source in the households, then the quality usually is much better of that waste, and you do some sorting, and then you can recycle it back as a material. And of course the authorities have to make sure that that whole system works. For example, if you introduce a separate collection of bio-waste, food waste, garden waste, then you also have to make sure that you build composting plants, for example, so that it can go hand in hand.
So it doesn't end with the sorting.
Exactly, and you need to set up the system of collecting the fees in a way that the people actually have an incentive to sort their waste.
You did mention that the biggest was actually construction and demolition waste.
Yes.
What happens in Europe with that kind of waste?
Well, first of all, there is a target on the recycling of construction and demolition waste, which is 70% of all that waste should be recycled. Then comes the but. The but is that what we currently see is that most of that waste is indeed recycled, but it goes into road construction. It doesn't really get back into new buildings, and that's all a matter of the quality of that waste. And there's
so there are different ways of recycling.
Exactly.
So you keep it still within the circle,
Exactly.
but it might be on a different stream within that circle.
Exactly. We call that downcycling. If you use it once for a very high value product, and then you recycle it into something very low quality value, we call it downcycling, because it can't get into another same circle.
Yeah. You wanted to
So
ask.
well, just what you start to look at as well then is, can you go down the route of a building refurbishment? Do you have to tear it down and start again, or can you figure a way that this building can be reimagined, maybe just from its skeleton? And so you keep the steel and the concrete in place, but maybe you put a new skin on it, make it energy efficient and such like. So it's really trying to get people to think about those approaches and prevent that waste.
Yeah. So there's something about design.
Yes.
That's also what I hear, from building design to probably product design and stuff. What kind of a role can design play? I mean,
well, in the briefing that we're talking about, I can just talk a little bit about that. That's one of the key things we're saying, is that if you've got a wind turbine, can you design that thing that you can take the back off it pretty easily, and you can swap out and put a new generator in. When this new technology comes along, you don't have to take it all down, you just take these pieces out modularly. So that's kind of an example of how design can be set up to facilitate a more circular economy. Sorry, I probably talked across.
No, I just can compliment that design is absolutely central, because it decides on how far you can extend the lifetime of a product, for example, and how far you can recycle it or not. There is design that encourages long use, repair or not repair, but also design for recycling. If you put together some sort of materials which can't be technically taken apart in a sorting plant, then it will not get recycled.
Mm-hmm. And Europe has got some legislation to help with this kind of eco-design, right?
Yes, the current eco-design regulations very much focus on energy efficiency, but this is going to change so that eco-design criteria are also developed for this kind of design for a circular economy and more circular use of products. Yeah.
Before we actually get to talk a little bit about what citizens can do, because I know that some of these concepts are new, some of the things that we know are more, I would say, concrete, like recycling rates, municipal recycling rates and stuff, which our viewers can find on our website. Other things about monitoring and measuring things around circular economy are a bit still under development.
Yeah.
Can we say that?
Yes, I think we can. So that's the area I'm working in. So yeah, the European Commission and Eurostat have set up a circular economy monitoring framework, so you can see some things there.
So we'll find out how circular our economy is. This is what you're going to monitor.
That's where we're going to work towards. So these are there already, so there are indicators, but I suppose the analogy we use sometimes when we're talking to people is a little bit like a big oil tanker and you're trying to steer it. So you can start turning the wheel, but the ship won't actually change direction for some time. So the economy is a big thing, and it's going to take a while to make that turn. So what we want to do is to get back into the steering wheel room and kind of see, are these things happening? Is the circular economy starting to happen? So that soon we'll start to see the economy changing. So what we're looking to do is to start developing this kind of data and measurement, so that are there more repair businesses happening? Are we seeing changes in design so that people's phones can be taken apart easily, and our phones starting to get designed? And eventually what we'll start to see then is, look, we're not using as much steel for the type of life we have. Copper is going down and things like this. So I think these big indicators will take some time to change, and that's where we want to get in and get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more.
Okay, so we will be working in that area, and then I guess there will be more output, so
absolutely.
We'll communicate them.
I was in a meeting this morning, we were talking about car sharing schemes, how widespread, and then can you look into searching on Google how much are people starting to search for car sharing schemes? So does that mean that I'm starting to think about a car sharing scheme instead of buying a car? So it's all starting to happen.
Very good. Which is actually one of the things that citizens could actually do. So if me as an ordinary citizen, what could I do to help minimize my waste generation or help contribute to this circular economy notion?
Mm-hmm. There's different options and different levels of options, I would say. There's the individual actions you can do. You can try to reduce the food waste you produce in your household. You can think twice before buying a new device, maybe find one used device instead or borrow one. These are the individual actions, but then you can also put some pressure on your politicians to drive more in that direction and to think about how the circular economy can be implemented and what is needed for doing that. And then the last level is probably if you want to make a bigger impact than just your little individual one, then you could engage with friends, with neighbors, with other people, and try to change things on the community level, for example.
There were some schemes like tool sharing schemes on a community basis, so not everybody needs to own a certain drilling machine and stuff like that. And maybe that's the kind of stuff that we'll see more and more of. I have another question, because sometimes this comes up in the news about waste exports and waste imports, and can you just clarify, because you did also mention a little bit that some countries and regions were more equipped to deal with certain types of waste, and what are we talking about here? Within the EU, outside the EU?
It's both, I guess. I come from Ireland. It's a small island, it's a medium-sized island, but the reality is we'll probably never have the capacity to recycle everything that we've talked about here today on that island. So we're probably always going to be exporting something to somewhere else to get processed. And there's nothing really wrong with that. You try and keep things as close as possible. It makes sense. Where the problem is you need to make sure that when you're exporting, you don't export to someone that has lower environmental standards than we would expect. If Ireland is sending something to Germany, where Almut's from for processing, that's a business transaction. It's when you start seeing things going to other countries and you kind of think, has that just been dumped in a field in someone's country? That's not right. So waste exports can happen, but I think what's important is to understand that the standards that have to be applied in and around that space. Is that?
Yeah, and there's also set specific regulations to deal with especially the hazardous waste, because hazardous waste is dangerous, and you really need to control it very well and where it goes. So there's international agreements and also EU regulations that kind of waste is put under very specific control, and you can't export it to a country that doesn't agree with it. And then, of course, you need to enforce that, because there is illegal activities on that.
But I can also imagine that certain waste, management and treatment and stuff require certain facilities where it doesn't make sense to have it in every single municipality and so on and so forth. So there is a logic.
Yeah.
We received one more question from Todd. He's asking, what should be done now to avoid the waste coming from renewable energy sources becoming a problem in the future? We also have another question from Janneke, who is saying, to which product groups will circular criteria be applied under the Sustainable Products Regulation, also energy installations, ?
I can certainly talk to the first one, for sure.
So yes, what should we do to avoid the waste coming from renewable energy?
Yeah, and it's a good question, and the timing is excellent. So what we have said in the report is, we're at the moment there's not that much renewable energy rolled out at the moment, so we're starting at a good place. We haven't missed the bus, so to speak, but it's going to grow fast. So what do we need to do? We need to make sure that we design things from now on so that we're able to reuse them, that we get energy companies to bring in their business models so that they are thinking about modularity, they're thinking about moving their assets around to get as much use as possible out of them. I think, we maximise the recycling. So again, we talked earlier about planning capacity for recycling. So this is what needs to happen now. Say, okay, we've got some data now. We can see in 5 and 10 years' time we're going to need to be able to recycle large amounts of molybdenum or something like this. How will we do that? So I suppose what we're saying is there's a signal now for industry to make their changes. We're saying there's a signal now for policymakers to make the changes, and the two will happen together. I suppose one of the key things for us is that at this point, this is green energy. And what would be awful was we discover in 10 years' time that it had a little hidden secret that actually wasn't as green as possible. And so the time is right now to take action before this, just as this transformation starts to happen.
Of course, like the ship, it takes a little bit of time to set things in certain motion and stuff. Will you be able to answer Janneke's question?
I don't know it from the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I couldn't either. So
but I think the proposal from the Commission is supposed to come out still this year, as far as I know. So it's about to keep an eye on what they propose.
And usually until the proposal is published and actually adopted, there could be different, there could be changes to the proposal itself and the kind of products that it could cover.
But maybe like in this circular economy action plan, there is a number of types of product value chains which get specific attention and where there is strategies being developed. And one of them is for plastics, another one is for textiles, for example. So there will be attention on those, definitely.
Yeah, because also textiles have a lot of plastics in them.
Exactly.
That's another problem, how they actually sort it out.
Yes.
Before we actually, our time is running up very soon, but we also received a question from Gaia Adeli, who is asking, can we have an example of downcycling a product recycled into, you did mention, maybe you could, you did mention the construction waste into roads and stuff, but something else that you could maybe share?
Yes, for example, plastics. If you collect plastics packaging, mixed plastics packaging, this is very, very difficult to recycle. It's a mix of all kinds of different polymers and additives, and so often what happens with this type of plastic is that it gets sorted but not very well sorted, and then you make some products out of it, like park benches or waste bins, this kind of things, which are at a different level than the original product, which could be like a plastic packaging for your cheese. So it doesn't get back into plastic packaging for cheese usually.
One more question from Daniela, who is asking, on that note, how exactly is quality defined in that context? I guess in the context of
in terms of
the product, I guess, the downcycling, etc.
There's a large chemical strategy for sustainability, which is gathering together an awful lot of work that's happened across Europe and for a long time now, but really trying to sharpen it up. Because of the circular economy, we might start to see more plastics going back into the system, and so trying to understand, what was used in these plastics and what they were used for. So is there danger that you might bring a contamination in? So do you get all this mixed plastic and then you make a park bench from it and discover you've put that in the playground and it has some sort of hazardous substance in it? So there's a real strong attention coming in now to try and understand what is in all these different plastics, so that when they keep going, so it's quite an active area.
There's a consideration on the health impacts, etc., or environmental contamination that could.
There's also industry standards. For example, for materials that where there's a market, a well-developed market, like paper and cardboard, for example, industry has defined a number of different quality standards, and then the sorting plants, they try to comply with these standards, and then they get a higher price on the market for their recycled materials. So areas or materials where this kind of industry standards don't exist yet, they are less well developed, and we should strive for a well developed market to make sure that the recycled materials really get used again.
Before we more or less captured everything that we wanted to discuss during this half an hour. Just 30 seconds max of last words that you'd like to share with our viewers. Maybe Shane, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, I suppose it's just, I might try and bring it back to our briefing, which is what brought us here. So just to, I suppose, reiterate the key messages that were there. So we have this briefing out. It's talking about a waste stream that's very rich in resources. It's talking about a waste stream that's changing all the time, and we're going to see more of it happening, and the growth rates are massive. We're saying that there's, it's not going to be too easy to deal with this. We need to think about it. These turbine blades we talked about are very complex materials, and so we're coming to this point there where we're saying that the time is now for both industry and governments to take action, so that they can see that that the credentials are right underneath this sustainable energy movement.
So that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we don't want to be in 10 years or 15 years' time.
Precisely, that's my
Almut,
speech.
what about you?
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that the circular economy can make a big impact and big difference for climate change. Because if we reduce the amount of materials that we extract and that we need to process and so on, then we reduce the amount of energy needed for that. We reduce all the environmental impacts related to extracting the resources, becoming aware that the circular economy has manifold benefits, I think will help to create awareness and bring it up on the agenda.
A win-win scenario,
yes.
Definitely. So with these words, I would like to thank both of you for having shared your work and clarified some of the messages from our latest outputs and some of the issues. I'd like to thank our viewers for your questions, and we will be back with other live chats with our experts. And thank you very much.